praise to you, O Christ, King of eternal glory. I will leave this place and go to my Father and say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Glory and praise to you, Christ, King of eternal glory.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. The tax collectors and sinners were all seeking the company of Jesus to hear what he had to say. And the Pharisees and the scribes complained. "This man," they said, "welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he spoke this parable to them. A man had 2 sons. The younger said to his father, "Father, let me have a share of the estate that would come to me." So the father divided the property between them. A few days later, the younger son got together everything he had and left for a distant country, when he squandered his money on a life of debauchery. When he had spent it all, that country experienced a severe famine, and now he began to feel the pinch. So he hired himself out to one of the local inhabitants, who put him on his farm to feed the pigs. And he would willingly have filled his belly with the husks the pigs were eating, but no one offered him anything. Then he came to his senses and said, "How many of my father's paid servants have more food than they want, and here I am, dying of hunger. I will leave this place and go to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as one of your paid servants.' So he left the place and went back to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with pity. He ran to the boy, clasped him in his arms, and kissed him tenderly. Then his son said, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But the father said to the servants, 'Quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the calf we have been fattening and kill it. We are going to have a feast, a celebration. Because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now the elder son was out in the fields, and on his way back, as he drew near to the house, he could hear music and dancing. Calling one of the servants, he asked what it was all about. 'Your brother has come,' replied the servant, 'and your father has killed the calf we have fattened, because he has got him back safe and sound.' He was angry then and refused to go in. And his father came out to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have slaved for you and never once disobeyed your orders. Yet you never offered me so much as a kid for me to celebrate with my friends. But for this son of yours, when he comes back after swallowing up your property, he and his woman, you kill the calf we have been fattening.' The father said, 'My son, you are with me always, and all I have is yours. But it is only right that we should celebrate and rejoice, because your brother here was dead and has come to life. He was lost and is found.'" The Gospel of the Lord. That gospel that's proclaimed to us today on this fourth Sunday in Lent is one that we are very familiar with. We know it well. But I wonder if sometimes a familiarity means that we actually don't hear it very well. You know, even what we call it the parable of the prodigal son. If ever there was a wrong name put to a parable, that is it. This is not about the prodigal son. This is about the prodigal father, who is prodigal in his forgiveness and in his mercy. The focus of this parable is the father, not the two sons. You know, but it's a very rich parable. There's lots in it. And there's lots of different angles that, as a preacher, I can take. There's lots of different things in this gospel to work with. And really, we've only heard a third of the gospel. This part of the gospel is unique to the evangelist St. Luke. And it really sums up a lot of what St. Luke is trying to get us to understand about his gospel. And it's a three-part parable. It's a parable about the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost sons. And this is the third part of it that we hear. I could speak for hours on this parable. So if you've booked a table for Mother's Day at a restaurant, before 2 o'clock, you're going to be late. You know, this gospel has inspired lots of literature. There have been reams of paper printed out about this gospel passage. Some great artworks have been produced, inspired by the parable of the prodigal son. It's a rich parable. And one of the things that St. Ignatius tells us to do to help us to understand the Gospels, to get a sense of what's going on in the Gospel, St. Ignatius advises us just to imagine ourselves in the scene that's been painted for us. Imagine yourself in the story. Be one of the characters, one of the people involved, or even just be a bystander in the story. And just to see what touches you. You know, as a preacher, sometimes you have to kind of just pick something with a gospel and go with it. And I've heard lots of different homilies about this parable and the different angles that some people try to take just to give it a new angle or something interesting. And I heard a priest one time saying that the angle that he wanted to take and they wanted to preach about was what it was like to be the fatted calf. We're not going to explore everything today, but I want to touch on a number of really important points about the parable. The first son, the younger son, he comes and he asks his father for a share of his inheritance. You know, really, when you think about it, what he's saying is, Dad, I'm better off if you were dead than alive. Now, even in our time, that is shocking. But for a first century Jew, it doesn't get any worse. I mean, he later on says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. He is spot on. You know, this is not just an offense against the Father. This is an offense against God, who commanded us to honor our fathers and mothers. This is as bad as it can get. And what does the Father do? He gives them it. He respects his son's choice. He respects his son's decision, even though he knows this is not going to end well for him. But he gives him the share of his inheritance. And then the father's right, the son goes off and spends all the money and has a good time and then hits a hard time. There's a famine in the land. You know, Luke tries to tell us just how awful things got for the man. He ended up working in a pig farm. And Jews don't have pigs. They don't eat pigs.
This is as bad as it can get. He's in rock bottom. And then we kind of get this sense of the son wanting to be reconciled with the father. Or is he? He makes up this big speech. He's going to go back to his father and give this great big speech. You know, he's going back to his dad, not because he wants to be reconciled. He's going back to his dad because he needs to feed his belly. His motive is really questionable. And yet, we have this next part of the story where the son is near to his father's house. And what do we see there? We see the father sees him at a distance. You know, we get the impression in the parable that his father's been standing watching for him since the day he left. He's been longing for this day. He's been looking out for his son, longing for him to come back. And he comes, and his son appears, and he starts this speech, and the father says, none of it. Get the best robe, put it on him, put a ring in his finger and sandals on his feet. Give him the dignity that he has as my son. And let's kill the fatted calf. We're going to have a celebration. The father is just overjoyed that his son has come back to him. And now they can live life together in the fullness of that great love. You know, it's a wonderful kind of expression of God's love and God's great mercy for us. That we should never be afraid, no matter what the motives of returning to God, we should never be afraid to do that. There is nothing that we can do that, as St. Paul tells us, separates us from the love of God. No matter how broken or sinful you may feel yourself to be, turn to the Father. His mercy is there. He is looking out for you. He is longing for you. He wants to restore your dignity as his son or daughter. But then we jump to the other son. And I have a theory about this, that I think the first son, it's clear what his problem is. The second son, I think, should resonate with us who go to church regularly. Because I think there's a real warning there for us. You know, the second son, is as sinful as the first son. There is no doubt about that. He has a hardened heart, that he sees his father as a burden. Things that we have to do to keep him happy. You know, how often do we come to church just because it's an obligation? Or we're scared that if we don't come, what will be the consequences? You know, what motivates us come here today to worship, to express our love for God? But I think perhaps more serious for us as an issue that we need to be careful about is how we judge other people who don't come to church. You know, the son judged his brother for squandering his inheritance. You know, at least the brother, the first son, kind of went out and did something with his inheritance. The second son just sits on it. And he condemns his younger brother. You know, do we, as churchgoers, do we look on those who don't go to church and say, why are they not here? Do we just heap on judgment on them? Or can we say to ourselves, how do we welcome them? How do we invite them? How do we make them part and know God's great love? It's a real challenge for us, I think. And I think that idea of the love and the mercy of God is something that we can really buy into. And it calls us I think, to reflect God's love in our own lives. To be a people who want to be reconciled, who actively work to bring about forgiveness. And I think we can all buy into that. Or do we? Let me scratch the surface of that and try an experiment this morning. There's a Russian businessman who has put up this advert. Wanted, dead or alive, Vladimir Putin for mass murder. And this businessman has offered $1 million bounty for the head of Vladimir Putin. Now here's the test. Over the last month, have you at any time thought it would be good if someone took Putin out? Put your hand up if you have. The people who've not got their hands up, I'll be available for confession after Mass. You know, it's a kind of natural thing to do. That we see evil being done on the behest of this man. And notice what the media is trying to do. It's trying to demonize him. It's trying to make him out something that he's not. He is a man. He is still a human being who is doing evil things. There is no doubt about that. You know, but I wonder, is meeting that kind of violence with more violence the way to solve the problem? Is vengeance the answer to this problem? I wonder if our time would be better spent praying to God hard for Putin's conversion. You know, the thing about if someone shot Putin is that he would probably be replaced by one of his henchmen who now has a vendetta. And so whatever's going on now would be 10 times worse because his successor would be able to justify it by the violence inflicted. But if Putin's heart could be touched by the mercy and love of God, then just perhaps the solution might be better. That if he totally changed his way of working, then this suffering that he's inflicting on so many people would stop. Forgiveness is the hallmark of being a follower of Christ. And don't kid yourself on, it is not an easy option. Pope Francis has got something to say about this. He says, to forgive from the heart is the road to sanctity. If God is merciful, holy, and perfect, we must be merciful, holy, and perfect like him. Sanctity, a man or woman who does this deserves to be canonized, become holy. The Christian life is simple, he says. The way to holiness is to be perfect in our forgiveness as our Father is perfect. And Pope Francis goes on to say, prayer, the Holy Father observes, is an antidote against hatred, against wars. If someone doesn't like you, pray for them, because powerful prayer, the Pope stresses, overcomes evil and brings about peace. Prayer is how we meet violence, not with violence. The whole point of the parable of the prodigal son is that, yes, we need to learn from the behavior of the two sons. We need to learn to be able to trust ourselves to God when we're broken and sinful. We need to develop hearts that are non-judgmental and forgiving of our brothers and sisters. But the real lesson of the parable is this. We need to become like the Father.